Hi, Brett. Great to have you on board for one of these fireside chats. So we've been talking about it for a while, actually. I think we've been playing a lot of email tennis, but finally we've been able to sort of get together and basically do one of these fireside chats. I'm really, really interested, and I think everyone who's listening will be interested in your journey. I know we use that word journey a lot, but I think from the fact that basically you've been both sides from being a teacher, but also now being in the edtech world. I
Mm.
think it'll be really, really interesting to get your views on the shape of edtech and exactly what's happening currently within schools and also what your views are with edtech. So why don't you first of all just tell us a little about yourself, as in the sense of what your journey's been like.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Really appreciate it. Excited to be on. I've seen a few episodes of it, and that's where the email tennis began because I was quite interested to come on and have a chat. So, yeah, I mean, I was a former teacher. I taught for 12 years. I was a former assistant principal. I taught in Bermondsey for actually just short of a decade. So, those people that know London pretty well, that's right in the heart of it. I actually didn't realize how deep into London I was when I drove to interview because I was so early in the morning that I could see the Millennium Wheel in the background at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was just like, wow, this is proper deep central London. And then from my experiences as an assistant principal, a school leader, head of faculty before I became assistant principal, I uncovered a real pain point around tracking and monitoring. And what I mean by tracking and monitoring is understanding exactly what grades my students were working at and then what I needed to do in order to move them forward. And a lot of complexities with that is the simple case that one, teachers I find it very difficult to use spreadsheets, and then two, in combination with that, is the exam board qualifications have particularly complex calculations. You've got scaling factors, you've got unit weightings. Some, qualifications have got 5 or 6 different units. Some have got 3 units, and then you've got to apply grade boundaries. So it becomes an exercise where teachers can kind of say, I feel like they're going to get X, when actually we've done all the heavy lifting for them to say, you can confidently say that you are now there, and this is what you need to do. This is how many marks you are away, etc. So it's been a bit of an insane journey. We've been in the market now for 10 years. We work with roughly 700 schools, and we're really proud of what we've achieved because we genuinely are really targeting how do we improve the students' outcomes, but also how do we make a teacher's life easier, a leader's life easier? How do we really help people? The thing that I'll close this bit on, Nick, is helping them feel in control. I felt as an assistant principal really in control, and really importantly, and this word doesn't get used enough. I just felt so capable as a school leader. So that was what I wanted to share. Hopefully, that wasn't too much kind of waffle. Gives everyone a bit of an idea of what I
Oh
was
no,
coming
not at
from.
all. I think people's journeys are really interesting because it ultimately, it's who you are, and I think as an audience as well, I think it's really important to understand where you've come from because I think lots of people from EdTech come from different backgrounds in the sense
Mm.
of they may have been teachers, but they might have been teaching different subjects, or in some cases, they might come from the technology side as well. So it's always good to hear your background. I'm gonna come back to because you talked about the sort of customer environment and experience, and I think that's really important. And I do want to come back to you on that. One of the things that I've always wanted to ask somebody because never been a teacher, so I'm coming from an ignorant background, I suppose, in that sense. But I suppose one of the things I'm really interested in is very much that sort of when it comes to assessment, and I've seen data and I understand, so this definitely can happen.
Mm.
Do you think there are ways when you're looking at assessment, you know, so there's an element of unconscious bias when it comes to
Mm.
assessment, I think. And,
Yeah.
and I think it's really interesting to understand, and I think it'd be interesting from a listening perspective, a listener's perspective, to understand how, potentially one, where does that happen and why do you think it happens? Obviously, it's unconscious, so obviously teachers do this, and I don't think they do it on purpose in a million years, because I don't think that's the case. But also, how can we support that to make sure there's less of that happening? So
Mm.
I think it'd be really interesting to get your views on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I I'll try and chunk this up a little bit. So, ironically, we're we're effectively a tracking and monitoring tool. So we deal with a lot of data.
Mm,
But actually, I'm not one of your typical what you would classify as your data. I mean, to coin a phrase, Rob Wall. I know Rob Wall relatively well. We got started talking to each other as a data manager. Wouldn't classify myself as that data geek, right? So what I do understand from my teaching practice, assessment is a funny thing because the purpose when we really look at assessment, what we're trying to understand is we're trying to understand where you are.
mm,
That's what we're assessing, right? And it sounds very broad, but we're trying to remove opinion. We're trying to remove any cloudiness. We just want to understand what you do or don't know, what you can or can't do in order for us to be able to take the action that you need for you to be able to move forward. So what I'm quite passionate about, really passionate about, is trying to remove that unconscious bias,
mm,
be really proactive with the data. Sadly, I do think it is something that exists. It's something that's very difficult to avoid if you don't have a robust system that reminds you of the truth. So the assessments are there to serve you with the truth,
mm.
not necessarily like I always say this, and I'm going to make sure I've got always got notes here to keep me refocused. But the exam doesn't care. The exam doesn't care about you. So when you sit your GCSE, you've got a teacher's opinion, you've got your teacher's feedback, and then you've got an exam. The exam has no personality, it doesn't care about the individual. It doesn't care how
Yeah,
many lessons you've attended. It doesn't care if you were expelled. It doesn't care if you did every bit of homework you could have possibly done whenever you were asked to do it. It doesn't care how neat your exercise book is. It only cares about how well you answer those exam questions, right? And that's what we have to remind ourselves. And we can, and I have seen, and I've even done it myself, Nick. There's times where I've implemented unconscious bias and I've either potentially marked something and not as favorably as I could have done. And that might be an actual practical P assessment because he was removed from my lesson last week. Experienced teachers learn to just treat assessments as the subjective, as the truth, as the clarity. I've experienced it recently as a teacher, sorry, as a parent. We had a kind of brief chat, obviously, just to talk about this pod, but
mm,
my daughter experienced it and it was a real eye opener. Now, I was actually ironically on a conversation yesterday and they were talking about, do you still have the same passion for what you do now as what you did 10 years ago? And I've got more now, having watched my daughter go through her A levels, and I'll be very specific around this conversation around bias. She was predicted EED for her A levels. And then when I spoke to her teachers, the conversation wasn't around, this is how she did in this mock. We've set a full paper, and this is what I've been trying to work on. And she submitted another essay that replicates an exam question, and this is why we're saying she's in an E.
yeah,
Some of the feedback was, well, she hasn't attended enough lessons to get, the grades, and she hasn't been present enough, Mr. Griffin. And I said, look, you got to understand that those things have nothing to do with her ability to perform in the exam. I won't go in. My daughter went for a particularly challenging time, which
mm,
often teachers don't understand, which is fine. I don't expect everyone to understand. I was supporting my daughter through it, but it was the opinion that those things contribute to an outcome that is not what we're talking about. The assessment doesn't care about how difficult your personal life is.
yeah,
Your assessment only cares about what you can do in that assessment. Now, when we actually reframed it and we started talking facts to my daughter, I said, right, let's sit an assessment. Let's get it marked. Let's sit another assessment because there's three papers you've got to sit. Let's look at how many marks you are away. Let's stop talking about opinion. Let's stop talking about what work you haven't done, the hours you haven't put in or should have put in. Let's talk about the facts. And then when you actually spoke about facts, what it did is it created oh, okay, this is where I am, not where someone thinks I am. And then on top of which, I want to take action for me versus I'm going to believing what other people are saying, right? Now, as a result of which, when we start speaking about the truth, she got ABB, got into a dream university, first choice university, ABB,
Amazing.
because we started talking about truth, not now. I don't need to name the school or the teachers. That's not my prerogative. But that was a true example for me as to why my daughter wasn't achieving well. Part of that narrative was the very simple fact that there was unconscious bias being applied to that conversation. And what we're really passionate about is removing the unconscious bias. I remember I had students that you could barely get them into lesson. Some of them were quite difficult. Sometimes I had to say, look, you can't be in here. I like I like you, but you're just causing too much trouble. And they would end up doing, they'd be in the top 25% of my class because they were smart kids, really smart kids. And the exam didn't care whether they got kicked out of Mr. Griffin's class, didn't care about my opinion. So, I will probably answer it in a different way to what someone who's what I would call, a true data enthusiast would answer it. But there's a bit of feeling around this for me, if that really kind of helps to make sense, Nick.
Yeah. No, 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 brilliant. Do you know what I love about that? You talking about that really. It also shows, an element where if you do or the impact of basically that unconscious bias, because obviously if you degrade in the child's what they potentially could get, that means you're almost disempowering them as well.
Mm,
If you basically up it a little bit, then obviously that means that's something to aspire to, which is partly what I believe, schools are about. It's about, inspiring, making sure kids feel, are empowered to,
mm.
to achieve. So I think that's really, really, really powerful story. I think, do you think AI will come in and basically try and take away some of that unconscious bias, or do you think the bias within AI might actually then create more bias, or do you think it's a strong, or do you think it's a positive thing?
I'm a bit optimistic in my thinking, and I think a lot of people have put a lot of real clickbaity things on LinkedIn and social media about AI taking teachers' jobs. It's only my belief. I don't, it's not certainly fact. My belief is we learned enough through COVID around how much human connection we need. And my belief is we're going to be able to harness AI to support human connection versus take it away.
Hmm.
My belief is AI is going to support us in creating truth and transparency and clarity versus teachers having to use either opinion. So, I'm not trying to shoehorn what we do, but it's just a good example. If you are trying to, if you're a geography teacher or you're a PE teacher, you're trying to use Excel and Google Sheets to try and ascertain where the students are working out, and it's quite a difficult exercise. You've got to understand the calculations, you've got to understand what then comes out is an idea of where they are because I've done some factual calculations, but there has to be an opinion in there somewhere,
Yep.
right? There has to be an opinion in somewhere because you can't just turn around and go, well, it's pretty inaccurate, but I'm going to put my opinion in, and then we are going to include subconscious bias, right? Do you work as hard as the other student? Do you deserve it as much as the other student? And this is the importance of the word unconscious. What I believe AI can do is really strengthen the information that improves the accuracy so that we are consciously starting to understand. I don't have the opportunity to apply subconscious bias because it's taken out of my hands. What I do have the ability to do is be here to support you, to help you with your decisions, to help you with motivation, help you facilitate a learning environment that's going to allow you to progress.
Hmm.
So my belief is it's not, I don't think AI is going to be taking away anything. What I believe it's going to do is I think it's going to help us provide richer information. And I'll give you specific examples because a lot of people sometimes they'll come on these conversations and they'll talk quite broadly. You can now sit an assessment that is marked by an AI tool against the exam criteria that gives you the feedback instantly after completing that for one individual, right?
Yeah.
Great. So you can do that 3 or 4 times over a month based on the learning you're getting from the teacher. And the teacher, we don't need the teacher's opinion anymore because they're sitting factual assessments that don't care about how many lessons you've been to. They don't care about how well behaved you are. They don't care about how diligent you are with your home learning. It just cares about how well you answer the questions. So the more information we get around that, the less teachers are going to be in a position to even behave subconsciously in any way, shape, or form. They're going to
Yeah,
be given just such true data that they're going to turn around and be able to go, this is where we are. We know this because you've been sitting assessments. And what do we need to do? Now, part of the conversation, this is where it kind of gets, tricky, is part of the conversation is I can help you all you want, but you're going to have a higher chance of me helping you if you come to lesson versus you aren't going to get the grades because you don't come to lesson. Does
yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in some ways, what it will do is make teachers. There still need to be that mentoring and coaching and all that. That like you say, that more emotive side of teaching. I think for
Mm,
sure. And again, AI it is a tool.
yeah.
You can't believe. You might want to believe 80% of it, but there's still going to be 20% which is wrong. We all know if you use ChatGPT, everyone knows that ChatGPT will get 80% correct, 20% you need to look over it and personalize it.
What I think AI is going to do is I think it's going to speed up the learning experience,
Hmm.
and we're going to need teachers to connect the dots. So what's going to happen is we all know, and former teachers, there's this methodology known as flipped learning, right? So flipped learning is that I want you to go and look at what we're going to teach next lesson. I want
Hmm.
you to engage with some questions based on what you've read or seen or gone through the PowerPoint, and I want you to tell me what it is you do or don't understand. So when you come to lesson, we're dealing with what you don't understand versus all the things going through all the stuff that's quite easy to pick up that you can pick up yourself. What we'll always, my belief is what we'll always need teachers to do is problem solve. And what I mean by
Hmm.
that is a student's going to watch some content, they're going to do an assessment that might be marked by an AI tool, and then they're going to learn that, and then and what they're going to do is they're going to sit there and there's going to be some way it's not connecting. And then they're going to need to lean on the teacher to say, help me get there. And then the
Yeah,
teacher's going to be able to go, brilliant, right? Yes, that's correct. That's correct. But the way to think about it, and this is where I believe that teachers won't lose their jobs, is because it's going to think of an analogy, or it's going to think of a way of reframing it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily, AI wouldn't. And then coupled with that as a person, and
yeah,
I'm more well as a student because I have a personal relationship with a human being. And that, I won't get into all the research around what it does to all of our, hormones and what it does to our actual balances as a being around other humans. We're born to be in communities and villages and all of that kind of jazz, but I know there's not this conversation around it. So I think that's my optimistic belief of it. Hopefully we don't end up like iRobot and all of the movies we watched in the 90s, Nick. But that's my optimistic belief for it.
I'm completely with you. I think there is that element of the, like you say, connection between child and adult. And that's what a teacher is. They're there to guide, help, support, educate, and that could even be education of AI. What is good, what's bad, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. I agree. I think if anything, it will speed, like you just said. I think it will speed up learning, and I think it will enhance learning because it will take it to a different level, which I
Mm.
think is really, really that's great. That's much more impactful, for sure. Got one more question on this, really. So, do you think there's enough taught about AI at the moment in schools, or do you think it's so early days that actually maybe it is the right thing just to sort of hold back a little bit, or do because kids are using it, they're already trying to utilize it for things like essays and lots of things that they're doing. I've got a niece who's going through GCSEs. I know for a fact she's using. Obviously, I won't name her, but she's definitely utilizing a lot of AI. In some of even just revision. I think we both went to a session regarding a tutor bot, and I think there's a lot of revision being done out there through AI.
Yeah, it's a great question again. The overarching word I come back to is truth. So if I think about a head teacher's lens on now,
Mm.
if I was a head teacher now, what I would do is I would actually increase the education for our teachers on what is available.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be really stressing too much or trying to drive the use of AI in the school at this point because my belief at the moment is head teachers have got bigger infrastructural issues than the use of AI. So the use of AI is another whole new another level because if you're talking about really sophisticated AI tools, the bandwidth needed, the sophistication of the databases that you have, it's something that is not just a simple case of, oh, we'll just, we'll use that on the, it's just a Google plugin. Some of it is quite low level, but really sophisticated, but doesn't need
Mm.
much of a power engine behind it. Some schools are now actually bringing their data warehouses in-house when spent their whole careers getting rid of them, and now they're saying, well, actually, we need to ramp up the power because of however much technology we need to use in the future. So that's interesting watching that go full circle. The reason why I say truth is, I think it leans to the fact that we've got to Im- improve the true. I would be educating the staff on what students are accessing to ensure it doesn't interrupt the truth. And what I mean by interrupting the truth is the students have got to go and sit an exam in an exam hall, and that is the truth, right?
Yeah.
We've got to be aware of what students are going to do because they're human in nature, right? They're going to want to be quite enterprising. They're going to want to cut corners. They want to make their life easier. So we've got to educate the school on what's available so that we know that we assess them in a way that avoids misinformation. They are doing better than what they think they're doing until they go and sit that point of truth. And the simplest way for me is like, great guys, you're using all these tools. I'm glad you're enhancing your learning experience. I'm glad you're ahead of the curve. I've got some of you using stuff our teachers not even aware of, but we are going to sit 4 questions from an exam tomorrow with a pen and paper.
Yeah.
And that's great. Are those tools helping you do what I know you're going to have to do, or are they helping you just cut corners on home learning? So if I was a head teacher now, I'd be thinking about, okay, great, let's get informed, but let's ensure that we prepare them for the environment which they are going to get tested in and assessed in, and therefore let's not chop their knees off through the fear of AI, but let's just get empowered to know that okay, they're probably going to use some of those tools. I need them to sit something physical so that they get the truth versus what is effectively misinformation. That's
Yeah. I
my
think
take on it.
no, I think that's really interesting. I think that's really good. So yeah, thanks for that. That's amazing. And actually now, so I want to step a little bit closer because I want to pick up on something you mentioned before, which was about basic customer experience and so on. And I think it'd be really interesting. Do you? So I'm going to correct. There's a quote from Henry Ford, which is basically, if I asked my customers what they would prefer, I'd have had to make a faster horse. Because ultimately he was the first person to create the automobile. But if he asked the customer, they'd just go, "Well, can I have a faster horse?"
Yeah.
Now the truth of the matter is, he was his own customer. He wanted to get from A to B quicker, and he basically had knowledge of technology. Do you think the fact you've been a teacher means that you can put your, yeah, I suppose you can wear those shoes. You understand that experience that you're after better
Mm.
than some of the people who are just basically technologists who are trying to come into education? Do you think it's helped more?
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's a great analogy that you've used there, which is around the automobile versus the horse. I think it's most definitely helped us on a number of reasons. One is just the empathy, but the empathy through the product. So we I'm reminded all the time when we go and visit schools, when we have, customer feedback conversations, when we have support calls, we're reminded just how precious teachers' time is. And for those of you who aren't teachers and those of you who are teachers that know this, I could go into a, I could go in Thursday morning, Nick, right? And I'm like, I've got out of bed. I am, really organized. I've got my lessons planned. I'm getting into school early. I've got form time, then I've got two free periods, and I've got break time, and then I've got, period three a free, and then I'm period one, five and six, and I'm going to get this done, this done, this done, right? That is instantaneously destroyed in moments in schools, moments.
Yeah.
And those moments are, I walk in and two kids will be out rolling around on the floor having a fight. That's That's the 15 minutes I had to get that sorted. That's the 30 minutes I had to do to get that. And on one meeting to another meeting, someone might come up to me and say, "Listen, you got to come with me. I've got to talk to this student. There's a real safeguarding issue."
Yeah.
And whatever you had planned is gone. So from that customer journey, knowing what a teacher's day and how little time they have to play with, we are really acutely aware all the time of making sure that we try to make the platform as easy as possible. And we always try, I'm going to use the word innovation. We're always trying to innovate for the teacher. So rather than saying, "Oh, here's what you asked for," and then them going, "Oh, it'd be great if it did this," there are some things that we do add because we didn't see it. But we
Yeah.
also pride ourselves on bringing in people into the team that will go, "Do you know what? If they do that and that, they're going to definitely want to do that." And then you get in there and you go, "Oh, they knew I wanted to do that and it's already doing it." Right. So it is important that we stay ahead of that innovation curve. I'm proud to say that the one of the biggest bits of innovation was actually showing that we can create a software that's doing what people are trying to do on Excel and Google Sheets. The best analogy I've ever known historically is actually Apple on two occasions. One is the iPad,
Yeah.
when they're like, people are looking at you going, "What is this thing? Like, this is ridiculous. I've got a phone and I've got a computer, and you've put one in the middle. This is like the car with wings." No one ever stopped to think that a car doesn't need to fly, right? And they built this car with wings, and you can't use it because you can't take it to an airport. You can't drive it on the road. So it's like the most useless invention in the world. But then but Apple were like, "No, no, no. We've done the research. We've seen what people." And then all of a sudden now a tablet has become part of everyday life. Same with the AirPods, right? You're going to want it without wires now. There's nothing's got wires. So yeah, I think it's important to know the companies that I've got connections with and people that we're interested in working with, and their founders have got teaching backgrounds. I do feel there is a real, you can see why they're growing because when you demonstrate it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have to explain it, you're kind of like, "Okay, well, I kind of get it, but if you think you've got a good idea for me, but doesn't really allow me to apply it, then it's not really what I need." But then if you show someone and they go, "Oh my God, that's the exact problem we have. We're buried in spreadsheets and there's data points and it's an absolute nightmare."
No,
So
no. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
go on.
no, no, go for it, go for it.
No, I was going to say I totally agree. I think there's always two elements. There's the I think there's the empathy, which you're talking about, which is understanding the day to day. There's a lot of companies, that we sometimes work with where they add more friction because actually they don't understand the
Mm,
emotive side of that role of a teacher, or it could be a head teacher. But understanding that target audience and saying, "Do you know what? You do understand the environment they're working in, and understanding that environment, I think, is really, really important because you know, it's the same for somebody on the reception. They might be entering in information, but then some child just being sick on the floor. They're not going to stop and go, "Well, you're just going to have to wait a few minutes." They're going to have to run around the desk and
yeah.
pick up that sick. And obviously, then that needs things like making sure there's autosave and all the things that we know, as part of norm, which
Yeah.
is really good. But you're right. Then there's the other element, which is, I think, innovation. Again, about, maybe there's tech out there that can sometimes do something a little bit more simpler or
Mm.
can add more value. And so it's probably bringing those two things together, I think, which are really important. And it sounds like, that's what you're definitely doing in pupil progress, which I think is really, really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting there. We haven't. I don't think any tech company can get it 100% right. And there's some tools that we use that won't necessarily be familiar in education, which is Monday and HubSpot and
Mm.
Salesforce, and these are billion-dollar companies, unicorn businesses. So when you reach that stratosphere and 1,000 people say, can it do this? And then 2 days later it does because 1,000 people have done it. It's a you're playing in a different stratosphere. So you've got to really at this level that we're at, especially in the education technology market in the UK, you've got to be so close to what the end user wants, and there's got to be a blend of, well, we know that because I used to be a teacher, our head of sales used to be a teacher, our co-founder used to be a teacher, so we can make some innovative assumptions,
Mm.
which does most definitely help us. And a lot of feedback does come. It's great that you do understand us, you do understand even the support, right? We don't charge for support, and we have a chat function that you can access anyone at any time to schedule a call at a free period whenever you're free, right?
Well,
So even you've been in EdTech a long time, so almost every platform, you got a support package and it's a number of hours, and if you want to actually, if I want to, but if we bought Monday, right, which is a software that helps you with your productivity and coordinate tasks and projects across your team, there's a subscription cost, and there's
mm.
no cost of how much time it takes. Because then what you do is you then bring, this is where some companies don't believe know their customers, because then you've got to go and no one can spend our time, otherwise it's going to cost us more money. So if you do have problems, come to me. So you're going
Yeah,
to add more. So our mantra is when we go and deliver, I said, listen, as leaders, you are thinking this is going to add to your to-do list. We're going to take stuff away, because anytime a teacher asks you about something that needs doing on pupil progress, you can turn around to them and look them in the eyes and say, have you asked pupil progress? Because I know they have the answers, and there is no cost to you booking a call, asking on a chat, sending an email. If they are really struggling, and then they would be telling me, which they're not because you haven't spoken to them. And then leaders go, whoa, right, okay, I'm in, because I can push that and they can go and find their answer. So we have NQTs. Oh, well, they're not NQTs anymore. What's the new acronym, Nick? I always forget. They're not newly
oh,
qualified teachers. I don't know. I
yeah,
don't know what they're. ECTs.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's right.
yeah, yeah,
ECTs.
yeah.
And they, all the way through to principal can book a call and go, look, listen, I'm really struggling with this.
See that to me is again going back to the true definition of frictionless. And I
Yeah,
think, the way that you're taking that friction away and understanding the school, taking the pain away from the senior leaders, that is, that's really, really impressive. You know, but with the understanding, I guess, that there is a cost to you guys, and as you scale, there'll be a cost. But the idea that basically somebody can just phone up and go, "I've got this problem, can you help me?"
yeah,
That's thinking from the customer element, which I think is really, really strong. And like I say, that frictionless, we always talk about creating frictionless environments, and I think that is true. It doesn't always have to be tech, if you see what I mean.
yeah,
It can sometimes be the personal stuff, which is, I think, sometimes really important to schools
yeah.
because they're busy places. Don't need they don't want,
I,
you know.
I think I've only just about recovered after leaving teaching 10 years ago, Nick. It was, yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, I loved it. I've still got some great friends from when my time at in central London, but it was I tried to explain this as I don't think I've ever worked as hard. I mean, I work really hard with pupil progress, and
Mm,
it's a level of deep mental complexity that it's difficult to really understand. But teaching was so physically demanding, just talking all the time, constant decision making, constant need from attention from either your students or, honestly, it was a level of relentlessness I've never experienced again. Because even in my environment now, I still feel really, I still feel for some teachers and a lot of the leaders, because if I want to, I can just go, right, do you know what? Let me go and get coffee, right? And let me just go and just decompress a bit, and I'll be back in like 20. I can do that. Anyone can in business can do that. If they really need a half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour, it's no problem. But you can't do that in teaching. I remember a girl, she came into the staff room and she was floods of tears. She, the wedding that she planned from the summer, her partner had separated from her, and he's moving out the apartment. So she's gone from planning to be married to, now, and she's just, right, drying her tears and getting ready for period three. And it's like it's just in the staff room, like, okay, right, go and put a face on for, as in like, an act on for period three. Get through three, get through four, get through five, and then I might be able to get out the door. It's like this is the thing that the energy and the workload in suppressing that, managing that, that's that's what people don't understand about teaching until you've done it and really understood just how relentless your time is in a school day.
Oh man, my sister, she's out of out of being teaching now, but there's some of the story. The fact is, teachers are social workers, they're childcare, they're educators, they're when you sort of go anybody in a business, and man, I have it easy with Sarah and but when you go, you have to recontextualize, and we all find that hard. Can you imagine that in, well, as you do, but can you multiples, of recontextualization? Right, this child needs this level of support. This child needs, we need to go into I now need to go into a lesson and teach multiple children who are at different standards. I
Mm.
now need to, basically now patch up a kid's knee or stop them from being punched, or I need to stop that kid over there from, I don't know, because they've got mental health issues or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
I accept, even though I've never done it myself, I accept it's probably one of the hardest environments to be in.
yeah, without question.
One other question, and going back to value, I suppose, and going back to friction. So, do you think, because lots of businesses sort of ask this, I think there's this sort of element when you bring out a product and it's in that introduction, it's that normal hockey stick sort of type of life cycle model. When jumping over the chasm, and that's that bit between introduction to growth,
Mm.
do you think it's easy to, do you think it's easy for either to demonstrate, or do you think schools and mats find it easy to understand the value of a solution? Because you're obviously competing in lots of cases as well. So how do you create that differentiation and sort of go, by the way, this is why we're much better? And do you think that, you get the time to to explain that as well? What do you think about that sort of that movement of people understanding the value of what you're trying to deliver?
Yeah, I mean, I'll without any shame, I'll correct you on the word easy. Nothing's ever easy in business. There's no do you think, the moment you said do you think it's easy, I'm like, no, nothing's
No.
easy. Nothing. Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I've written down what I like to do on these conversations is kind of just absorb and then go, what's the word that screams out to me? And the two words that scream out to me is actually trust again.
Yeah.
And it's also anecdotal. It's very difficult to really tie down really concrete metrics that show that this software does X, right? And I'll give you an example. So we're used by Leighton Park. It's one of the most successful independent schools in the UK. They used our platform and they had an increase of 9% in their GCSEs and had an increase of 15% in their A levels. Now, thankfully, it's a bit of a unicorn scenario, is they did a teacher survey and a lot of the teachers, it was around like 78, 76%, something like that, of the teachers cited that a tighter grip on where students were working at as a result of better tracking
Mm.
was part of that solution. However, you might go, done deal, right? The results went up because of X. Well, you can't just say that because there are some other factors. You'd have had line managers who would have gone and spoken to people who would have said, well, the results weren't maybe where we want them to be. How can we support? They'd have got extra support outside of just a tracking system. So it's great to say that it's part of that solution and not the only reason, because
Mm.
we also don't want to discredit the teachers for the incredible work they've done to show that improvement and that uplift in the results. I mean, they had incredible results anyway. So they're a school that's seriously striving for excellence. And what, with regard to the trust piece, the best way is, and I'm just thinking about the best way to articulate this, is really anecdotal in that I'm a vice principal, I'm a principal. This really works. There's lots of things that we will be doing in and around this software being implemented, but this really helps us coordinate what our efforts are. This software really helps with visibility. It all actually comes down to a school that's using us, a trust that's using us, being able to validate anecdotally that it works.
Mm,
Because the data can only take you so far, because quite simply, every organization involves people, and it is more than just a tracking tool that comes in. Now, is it absolutely part of that whole shift and mindset of this is what we're going to do in a few areas, and this is going to help us coordinate that and point the arrow in the direction, and make sure that we're firing the gun in the right places? Absolutely. But you need what you were talking about earlier, Nick. You need that trust in the market that other schools use it and can stand by it in an anecdotal way and actually go, wow, yeah, I've heard that person speak about it. I trust them. I
yeah.
trust that vice principal. I trust that CEO of X, trust or consortia. So that's the way we've seen it go. There's a lot of there's a huge number of people that buy software that you don't know who they are. So it used to be a long time ago that they would get on your emailing database, and they would, you'd have their phone numbers. Now people just turn up blind because they've done all of their research. They've gone to other schools, they've gone and spoken to someone else, or they've gone and looked at the videos online, or they've gone to EdTech Impact and looked at some reviews. They've done the research, and then they turn up and say, now I'm interested. And you're like, whoa, I didn't, where have you come from? Right. We've had 3 form submissions this morning saying I'm interested in using this for the whole school, and we they're not in our database. We don't have their email address. We don't know their name. They don't, because they've been doing the work elsewhere and then come into the front door. So
But
it's
that's
all,
very positive, by the way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all predicated on trust. It's all, and that's what we're building. We genuinely believe what we're doing here is can have a real impact on your students' outcomes. And again, it's not just the silver. We were talking about silver bullets, but it's not just a silver bullet. It's one of your 12 silver bullets or one of your 6 silver bullets. And they're, in combination with other things, is going to really make a difference.
And do you think so? I think that there is definitely an element in the market sometimes where, how do we put this? So I think in some cases there's an element of going, do you know what? Does it tick the box? So if it ticks the box, that's good enough. I might employ an extra 2 people, but then you go, well, the return on investment's really poor because ultimately 2 more people is going to cost you more than probably the software itself, or even a better piece of software. So I think sometimes that value, you described it perfectly. In that one school, they've increased the performance by 9%. Brilliant. Shows additional value in
Mm.
the sense of what your product does or what Pupil Progress is doing. Do you find sometimes that is can be dismissed though when they go, well, I do need an assessment product, but do you know what? That one over there is the cheapest, so I'm just going to go for that one. Do you find that you're sometimes competing against that? Which I personally, by the way, we put a lot of stuff out about it. I hate. I hate it whenever I see a bid about money when they go the cheapest, please. You go, no, that's just wrong. It should be about return on investment. What's the value you're going to get back?
I'll give you 2 examples. One is a random one. Um, it's table tennis tables, right?
Yeah,
Okay. And the other one is actually something that happened to us very recently. So our old finance procurement lead at the school, we need to buy, basically we needed to buy table tennis tables every 2 to 2.5 years because they just got a shelf life. And there's a particular brand that we buy to help it last for 3 years. Now they're not insanely expensive because we need Olympic table tennis tables, but they're not cheap because we know we don't want to replace them after 12 months.
hmm.
So there's a particular brand that we buy. So put the order form in. We need 12 table tennis tables. And then what gets delivered 3 weeks later? The cheapest table tennis tables, right?
Yeah.
So I've gone up to the office. I'm like, look, talk to me about this. I asked for those table tennis tables. I went and did my research, Brett, and we've saved £1,426. I said, wonderful. We're going to have to reorder the same table tennis tables next year because these are going to fall apart because I've bought these ones before. So we've actually not saved 1,460 odd pounds. We've just set fire to probably 3,000 because we've got to now buy the good ones in 12 months' time.
Yeah, yeah.
So talk to me about what is the cheapest versus the most cost effective or the most efficient. And that is where I feel a lot of trust can get pulled into. Very recently, I'm not going to name any names of any, but we had a trust that's now using us for their 5 schools. We were being used for 2 schools, and then there was another 2 schools that were interested in using us. And then what happened was they brought someone in who was going to go on a cost saving exercise, and we were replaced with a cheaper option. It wasn't really an option because it wasn't doing what we were doing. And then, they had to come back and say, look, this hasn't worked. And now we need to come back because although it was at a higher price point, it's doing what we really need it to do. And we're also saving time, energy, and effort. And I really applaud that leadership because they did that analysis and really worked out that actually just not the cheapest version is going to work. And we're trying to really disrupt the market in a really positive way to understand, yeah, there are some things that do cost less than what we do. But if you subscribe to us and implement it well, you are going to see the cost savings in multiple ways. People that were doing X amount of work on X can now do it somewhere else. There are things that you can redistribute in terms of physical human resource because that person no longer needs to do that. Your teachers are going to get, I was talking at a conference literally last week about sixth form. It's a really, I'll be bold when I say it. I don't mind. I'm quite an honest person. If you get more students come to your sixth form, that's £6,000 to £6,500 per student. If you retain those students for the second year, it's another 6,500 to £7,000 a student. If I invest in a really first class tracking tool that ensures that that they do well and don't want to leave, or we do so well that more students want to come. I had one head of sixth form turn around and say, Brett, your software costs as much as it cost me to keep one more student that I often lose next year, or a
Yeah.
new student I get coming because the results are better. So that was a okay, great. You understand financial, this is cost effective spend. The
Yeah.
difficulty is some schools and trusts are like, we can't spend anything. You're like, no, no, no. Like, I've been there as a business where you've got to be careful with in certain points in our journey earlier on where you've got to be careful on what you spend your money on. But you've also got to be careful what you don't spend your money on to to ensure that the picture gets even worse. You know,
I'm totally with you. I think there's situations where, we've done an audit on a map before, and it's not really our thing, but, where they've got multiple solutions doing the same thing in a single school. And you
mm,
sort of go, wow, that's where the money, that's where some money is being wasted for sure. So you do, I always sort of suggest do an audit of all your different systems about what you're trying to achieve, and then try and identify the best solution for that job rather than basically where it could, because I know 80% of the cost of the school are staff, but that there's still multi-million pound businesses in lots of cases, and you do go, find the right solutions, find the right ones which will give the best return on investment. That might mean creating efficiencies, that might mean getting higher results in the sense of, it could be financial, could be progress, it could be, safeguarding, which are normally the 3 top things that,
yeah,
schools and mats care about most. And, find the best solutions that can provide those. That's if you're measuring yourself against that, then find the best solutions that give you the best chance to make that successful.
yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, there's all. I do really enjoy the trust that do. You've got to evaluate what's adding
Mm.
value. We're definitely not advocates of just buy everything because that's going to help. Because some, more systems can also eat into time, even though they might be the right system. So you do have to make a choice. We're not suggesting for a second. We've had a number of schools ethically as well. We've had I had one smaller school recently. I said, look, I'm going to be really honest. You've got such a small cohort. You've just brought in Arbor as an MIS because you tipped over. Look, come and talk to us in 2 years. If you still need really accurate tracking, even though you're an alternative provision school, and people that are really asking you for it, it's important information. Your education context is different to that of a 1,200 school academy that's part of a multi-academy trust that's got to nail A8 and P8 and make sure they're performing well in league tables. Come and talk to us in 12 months because there's an ethical side to this. There's a what is right for the school, and let's help educate the market on what is the right things for your school. Um, I think there's some technologies out there that I think are going to really win big because they're
Mm.
doing what what I believe we're doing, which is being a point solution, which is not trying to do multiple things kind of well and do one thing really, really well. So I think I believe that there's more and more solutions that are coming out which allow schools to go, roughly like 1 in 5 schools that we get in contact with, or like get in contact with us, will buy the product. They'll go, actually, this is,
That's good.
we'll buy this, right? So it's like, okay, if you've got a number of softwares where if you're doing a really true point solution, the nature of the cost and how cost effective it is will be so clear. Because if you've got too much and your offer's too broad, it's like, well, we kind of got that for that, and we're double spending there, and that module that you've got overlaps on what we've already got, and can we buy that without that? And it becomes difficult to see the value proposition. Whereas actually, I mean, I've been talking. I always like to share other edtech companies as well. Applica is another one. I actually met with him the other day. We were at a conference together, and they do sick form. They do sick form applications. They make that really
Mm.
easy for a sixth form. They're really easy for teachers. Really transparent for the students. Really, that transition from GCSE to sixth form done, taken care of, nailed.
Yeah,
Oh, I know
brilliant.
what the value of that is because I spend X amount of time on that. Doesn't do this and a bit more of that, and some of what the MIS does, it just does that super well. And that's what we believe we're doing, which is, oh my God, yeah, I can see how many hours we spend trying to get data in across the school. I can see how many hours my data manager actually physically spends on getting data from spreadsheets into MISs into analytical tools. Okay, it makes sense for us to spend money on this. So as part of it, I suppose, I know I'm talking a lot on this section, but as part of it as well is we've got a job as founders to really demonstrate the value proposition and not just hope they can see it. Because if you
Yeah.
can't see it, then you haven't really got your message clear, then have you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you.
Mm.
The message, and I think the great thing is, we all know that education changes. We all know that government will change and want to, let's face it, it won't be that much before they basically say this is actually how we do one. Moving away from assessments, so they're now going to bring in more assessments. The thing is, at a company like yourself, you can pivot as and when the needs change within the market really easily. Where sometimes when it's a big, and Sims was exactly a point of that, which is, did we spend much money in Send in the end? Not really, because actually it became less of a priority than some of the other things. So you're right. The point, these single point sort of solutions can pivot and move much quicker with the changing changes of the market.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we're going to end up in a world in which there's a lot of. I think the model of a one-stop shop is a typical kind of noughties and nineties, even late, mid 2010s. Those days of one-stop shops really, I think, are going and will go relatively quickly because of how we're now starting to see how deep each point solution needs to go. And that's it. that's a key element to how the ed tech sector is going to start being shaped.
Cool. Okay, I always ask everybody this. So, thinking forward into the next 3 years,
Mhm.
it's always interesting to get people's views on this. So, how do you, well, one, how would you like to see the shape of the market go in the sense of, what do you think is important that government need to be thinking about, schools need to be thinking about, and Mats, and also, regarding people progress, where do you see people progress in the next 3 years?
Yeah, I want to try and bake in some sleep in there somewhere in the next.
Do you know, I was trying to go, what did you just say?
Want to bake in some sleep. That'd be great. No, I mean, um, what do I see in the next 3 years? What I'd really love to see is a lot more ed tech companies integrated with each other, really getting platforms connected, really just getting rid of this idea that, oh, we might do that at some point, because you're not. There's just, you've got a really great solution, we've got a really great solution. Let's connect, let's make it super easy for the schools. I've seen it in the the private sector. I've seen it in business sector. If I buy a software, it is guaranteed to talk to Google, to Microsoft, to HubSpot, to without even speaking to anyone. Click here to integrate. Give us your, type in your login details, authenticate with that email. It now works together seamlessly. I think the faster edtech as a community starts to go right. And I'm not talking about everyone because what's the point of that software connecting with that if there's no value? But if there's value and the schools are saying, because we've had some conversations in the past where we've got like 25 schools saying, "Can you talk to this one?" And they go, "Well, actually, do you know what? We might do this, and we were looking at tracking last year, and I'm like, let's just okay, great. If you want to do that as well, connect now, right? And then if you want to get into some tracking in the future, do that as well. But this solve the problem now. So I think what I would be most excited for is in 3 years, I'd want to see a really integrated education technology marketplace. In terms of 3 years, what I'd like to see infrastructure, I'd really love an investment in the government of ring-fenced technology infrastructure. I'd like to see funding that is not like I'm just going to give schools more money because they're under pressure, they're underfunded. I'd like to see, obviously, through the right processes, but big contracts that allow schools to access the infrastructure they need to support the technology these schools want and need. And I'll be really specific about that. The best available, Microsoft computers or Apple computers. If it was me, I'd be like, there should be a contract with the government supporting schools in being able to access the very best technology. I've been in schools, and this is frightening. This is only a few months ago. I've been in a school. It took me 11 minutes to turn the computer on to be able to do the demonstration. That's in 2025.
Wow.
I'm still having Zoom calls where I've got to put the phone on loudspeaker because they don't have a computer that has sound or the sound stopped working. I haven't been in a school yet where that's not true. There's a lot of, Microsoft Surface Pros, and a lot of schools now are using computers with a lot higher battery life, but people are still walking around with cables and charging cables because wherever they got to go, by the time they get there, the battery's gone. So it's effectively a desktop computer. There's nothing mobile about it, right?
Yeah.
So I would be asking the government in the next 3 years, I'd love them to invest in improving bandwidth, speed of internet, and then on the actual the hardware that teachers can use. I mean, we saw a school. I was actually talking about this yesterday. There's a school in central London that use our platform, and you walk in the school, and they every single teacher's got a MacBook Air, and
Yeah.
everything's connected via Chromecast to the projector. And then they said, "Oh, Brett, do you want to come in here and we'll have a chat?" And then I said, "Oh, okay. How do I? Oh, just open it up and collect and select Classroom 23." And then you just select Classroom 23, and then what was on my computer is on the whiteboard. And
That's
I said, this is unbelievable. We had to talk about it for about 15 minutes. And they said, yeah, I mean, now we've got teachers that can do a bit of work on the train. They get, they feel a bit more freer. They actually, can go and get a nice coffee now because they've got a nice laptop. The battery lasts for a good 6 or 7 hours. See, these are all stuff that really make a difference. These are the tools. It's like asking Lionel Messi to go and play football in a pair of like work boots. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I don't. Do you love football? No, not really. Now I'm trying to kick a ball in some work boots. Like, if I had a pair of the latest Nikes on, I'd be skipping out there, right? And in terms of,
saying
yeah,
that though, I think Lionel Messi might be even good with work boots.
yeah. I mean, I still don't fancy my chances, even if they're work boots. But yeah, and I suppose for pupil progress, I'm just excited for how we're growing. My real personal drive, and I know the team's real drive is that student empowerment is so critical because when you get students really on board and they take ownership of their own learning, it also relieves a lot of pressure on the teacher and it brings out the best in the teachers too. So we are driving deep point solution as a tracking and monitoring tool that is going to enable teachers to really get a grip of what do I need to teach my students in the very next lesson, and I'm giving them the information that empowers them to be the very best learners. So that's, I suppose, my answer of what I'm looking for in the next 3 years, or what I'm excited for in the next 3 years.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And thanks, Brett, for sharing. I appreciate you're a busy person. As you just said, you haven't had time to sleep. So, thanks very much for coming on board and sort of giving us your, absolutely amazing words of wisdom in the sense of what's happening in the market and also your journey, which I think is really important. I think lots of people will be inspired by, what we've been going through. I think from summary perspective, I think I think that there's a few takeaways I've sort of taken from what you've been talking about. One is really do empathize with your customer base. Make sure that when you build out, and that more than just the product, the overall environment of what you build out, make sure it's as frictionless as possible. Making sure you understand what actually is going on as far as your target audience and the users, what they're going through so they can actually trust you, going back to the trust point. And I think trust is another factor which, you know, really understand that schools and mats, that they've got so many other things going on, they have to build that level of trust, which is much higher
Mm,
because they don't, at the end of the day, they have to take in consideration the highest priority, which is the children, and that's where they're going to spend the money on. If you want to basically be able to provide solutions that will enhance either, progress, safeguarding, then prove it. Prove it to them. Put
mm.
extra effort into gaining that trust, and I think you'll be successful. But yeah, that's what I've taken away from some of the things you've been talking about. So thanks very much, Brett, for your time. And yeah,
I've loved it. I've really appreciated it. I could talk about this stuff all day. So thanks for having me on, mate. I'd love to have a chat again in the future, and looking forward to seeing it going out. Thanks, Nick.